Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lauren Poach. I'm the event manager here at Stewardship, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I'm just going to start this today's session in prayer. So if you could all just pray with me. Father God, we just thank you for the gift of partnership and community. Thank you that your word is so true, that you never leave us, Lord, and that your plans are for the best of us, Father. So I just pray that today you will go before us. You will have your hand on this webinar and just really speak through us, Lord. May our words be your words, and may you guide us all to help create a better and bigger kingdom for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. So it's a pleasure to host another webinar as part of Stewardship's COVID-19 series. Today's webinar is in partnership with Kingdom Bank and Ansvar Insurance on the topic of insurance risk management for churches and charities. Today will mostly be consisting of questions and answers, so please do start submitting your questions on the topic, if you do have any, by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom page. So now I'm just going to hand over to Chris Perkins, who is the head of Church and Charity Lending here with us at Stewardship, who just has a few words for us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This event is the first jointly organised event by Stewardship and Kingdom Bank, as Lauren said, following the creation of the new partnership between the two organisations. Stewardship has over 1,000 years of history dedicated to promoting Christian generosity and finance. And we are now proud to link up with Kingdom Bank, who have some 65 years of experience of financing growing churches and providing specialist insurance broking services. With Stewardship, now a shareholder in Kingdom Bank, together we are able to provide a broad cross-section of products and services and advice to churches and Christian charities in the UK. And during the current crisis, are now working together to provide help and advice to customers of both organisations. Between Stewardship's lending and Kingdom Bank's mortgages, we are currently helping over 300 churches to buy, build and renovate their buildings with loans of a combined value of approximately 60 million. Whilst we don't provide insurance products at Stewardship, we're proud to link up with Kingdom Bank to gain their expertise, as it is an area that is vital for church and charity clients. And with this, it's my pleasure to introduce our first subject expert, Barry Walker, Head of Insurance for Kingdom Bank.
Hi all, big welcome from me and thanks for joining us today. As you can see in the title, we're here to hopefully provide some guidance around insurance and risk management relating to COVID-19 issues. We're going to talk about the management of buildings currently potentially closed and unoccupied, what precautions should be considered before reopening, and how we can safely start to think about bringing people back for gathered worship. We definitely want this to be driven by mainly Q&A session today, but I'm just going to hand you over to James Manning, who is the Head of Underwriting at Ansvar Insurance. Ansvar are a specialist faith and charity insurer who we partner closely with, as well as others. And James will run through a brief introduction for you now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Boy, is it hot. I'm sure I'm not the only one suffering at the moment. Today's session, the objectives of today's session is to provide some clear guidance and advice on what we should be doing to protect your properties during the COVID crisis. Can we move to the next slide, please? And again. And again. Barry's already confirmed that Ansvar Insurance are a specialist ethical insurance provider of packaged and non-complex general insurance solutions for the church, charity and not-for-profit organisations. We currently have 6,000 free church customers and 17,500 charity customers. We're a wholly owned by a charity or churches trust, so all our profits go towards supporting the charitable goals of the trust, and mainly this is targeted towards church and charitable causes. Next slide, please. We are currently working under unprecedented circumstances, and today we've been given the opportunity to share some of our experiences and hopefully provide a little guidance and support in relation to risk management for both churches and charities. The webinar is very much in the style of a Q&A, and I would encourage you to send through any questions, and we will endeavour to answer these after the session. If we can't answer any of the questions, we'll endeavour to get back to you after the call. So before reopening churches, I thought to start by providing with some guiding principles which we would expect churches and charities to follow both during and after the lockdown. During the lockdown, you would have had limited access to the premises, so there are a few steps which that you can take to protect the premises and reduce the probability of suffering a loss. Can I suggest that you carry out a quick risk assessment of the premises and the surrounding areas by walking around the site? Look out for any potential hazards. Remove any rubbish or waste from the site. This would reduce any fire risk. Check the security measures are in place and that the alarms and movement sensors are all working. If you're away from the premises and you can't gain access, secure the letterbox. And more importantly, carry out periodic checks. If there's someone local who can complete a visual check during one of their exercise trips, then that's fantastic. All I would suggest is that if you're carrying out these inspections, please make sure that you keep a log of your visits so that this can be tracked and can be demonstrated to us as insurers that precautions are being carried out. Before considering reopening your premise, there are a few steps you can take to ensure the safety of your congregation and to reduce risk. Cleaning the premises thoroughly and checking services are working, running taps for a period of time to avoid the Legionnaires risks that you might have with that. And more importantly, we need to follow the government rules on socialising insofar as the social distances. And once we've applied that, we can start to look to consider opening the church. I can go back, sorry. Yeah, each time church building is being used, once the church or charity premises is reopened, there is a number of steps which you will need to follow to reduce the risk of your congregation or visitors. This is not an exhaustive list, but some areas for you to consider. Establish a regular rota for cleaning and identify someone within the organisation to monitor and check that the cleaning processes are followed and the log kept. You see this in most eating establishments at the moment when we have access to them. If you go into the toilets, invariably there is a log at the back of the door which shows when the toilets were last cleaned. Operating such systems and strategies will ensure that processes are met and that you can demonstrate that you've taken the correct precautions. Next slide, please. On an ongoing basis, again, just to reaffirm, this is an ongoing process and we all need to be vigilant to protect each other. So again, continue to run the taps, flush toilets, and generally clean the premises. Next slide, please. Top 5 priorities for unoccupied premises. To go back to the lockdown scenario, premises should be treated as unoccupied, and there are 5 key areas which insurers would like you to focus on to protect the premises during these unusual times. There's the electrical fires. Unplug and turn off all electrical items and isolate if possible. Escape of water risk. Turn off water supplies and drain down the systems. we've already seen a number of cases already where this has not occurred, and as a consequence, escape of water claims have happened. And because the premises haven't been visited, the size of the losses have been substantially greater than had they been occupied. So we need to keep vigilant. Protect your property, and this is all about keeping good housekeeping, the removal of waste, empty bins. If you can't get the bins empty, then move them away from the premises so that they're not an easy target for anybody wandering by. And again, maintain those regular checks over that period of time. And finally, review your health and safety arrangements. Are there any other additional precautions which might be appropriate given the circumstances? So, you know, be vigilant and try to see what additional help you can give to ensure that the property is well protected. Next slide. Well, the next two slides really are to provide you with some signposting as to what financial support is out there for either your church or charity. Firstly, there's a joint initiative between the UK insurance industry and the Charities Aid Foundation, who've set up a COVID support fund and has raised already about, or money's been pledged, 82.5 million. And that's been raised by the insurance market. The fund is there to provide short-term and long-term relief to struggling community-based charities. So if there is a need and your church or charity falls within that category, there is an avenue for you to apply for support. Secondly, next slide, I think this is the government has set up a two-tier funding scheme. There's the small business grant, which is I've given you some information as to how that applies, and also the leisure grant. So there's two areas where small businesses, small charities are able to put claims in to get them over this current situation. And we have had a couple of our village halls already receive grants, so the actual funding system does work, and that funding can be quite quick once you've completed the necessary forms. And the final slide is just a few useful links, which I think that there is some very valuable information. Certainly the government coronavirus gives us quite a clear understanding of what we should and shouldn't be doing. There's the link to the grants, so you can gain access to that. I've also added the Ansvar risk management guides, and what we will do, we'll send out a pack with several different risk management guides which will help you through this difficult period. And there's also an Ansvar Covid-19 update link there as well. And finally, there's the health and safety. They have a number of guiding papers on that, and again, I recommend that you read that if you have any issues. So without further ado, I think that's a quick summary from me. It's really now over to the Q&A, really.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, James. Lots of amazing information there that's going to be very helpful, I'm sure, to a lot of people. I also would just like to add as well that Stewardship does have a COVID-related resources page, which does include many of these links as well. And these slides and the recording of this webinar will also be available on that webpage. We can give you some more information towards the end of this call. And also the fact that we, Stewardship also do have a rapid response fund to helping those. So if you're a Stewardship client and you want to know some more information about that, please do get in touch with us. Again, details will be given at the end of the call. So we better get straight on to the Q&A, I suppose, because we've got a lot of questions coming in. So thank you to all of you who have submitted your questions so far. I'm sure we're going to do our best to get to as many of them as we can. So we do have our panelists, sorry. So we've got Chris Perkins, who is Head of Church and Charity Lending here at Stewardship. We have Barry Walker, Head of Insurance at Kingdom Bank, and James Manning, Head of Underwriting at Ansvar Insurance, and they will be doing their best to answer your questions. Again, just to say, if you are looking to ask a question, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, not the chat function, the Q&A function, and that way we'll be able to get to your questions. So without further ado, let me ask the first question. So this is out to any one of you, if you would like to answer. Could an insurance claim on the grounds of negligence be brought against a church if someone thinks they got infected on the premises?
Yeah, do you want me to sort of field that one?
Go for it, James.
It's quite straightforward. Negligence has to be proven, and it is very difficult in these circumstances. We don't have the correct tests to be able to trace and track the individuals concerned. So whilst somebody may have contracted COVID-19, there's no definitive answer that was contracted within the church, and it would be very difficult to actually prove otherwise. So in that respect, yes, there can be a claim made against the policy, but proving it would be extremely difficult.
Sure. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, James. I think this might be another question for you as well. Where is the best place to find a simple risk assessment to complete as we plan to RTW and then later to public meetings?
Well, again, I would refer to the government website, and probably more appropriate is the health and safety. But I think we do have a simple risk assessment form which we can share with people after the meeting.
Okay, lovely. Yep, that's great. We can arrange that. Okay, next question. If the church is hiring a building, who is responsible for ensuring safe distance measures are in place?
I'll go for that one if that's okay. So it's Barry. If you are hiring a building, then obviously as the hirer, you will be responsible for your activities there and the well-being and safety of all participants. So the onus will be on you to do your risk assessment as to safe distancing measures, cleaning and all the rest of it that James has hit on. So the fact that you're hiring the premises as opposed to owning them, really the same kind of level of responsibility falls on you to make sure that it's a safe place for people to be.
Great, thank you very much. The next question is, what do insurers consider constitute unoccupied?
Well, this is when the premises is no longer being used on a regular basis. And clearly during COVID crisis, the churches and some community centres are no longer in use. So in that respect, they are unoccupied. We're not applying full unoccupied rules and regulations which are guided around that. But what we are recommending to our customers is that they look or they treat their premises as unoccupied. And as I said previously on the slides, it's a case of making sure that reasonable cautions are taken to protect the property. There's a lot of common sense involved in that, I have to say.
Sure. Barry, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, if I can. Obviously, there are several faith and charity insurers out there. So obviously you may not be insured with Ansvar, you could be with one of the others. But I can tell you from being a broker and dealing with them that the majority have lessened the requirements with regard to an occupancy, as James said. So the normal restrictions of up to 30 days cover, then restricted perils, visiting premises, etc. Most insurers have agreed to extend up to the end of June that those kind of restrictions won't apply. And a weekly visit that would normally be expected for inspections, really you should only be doing if it's safe to do so. So it's following the government guidelines. Don't put yourself at risk to do that. But if you can, then obviously insurers would prefer you to be making those weekly inspections to make sure everything is secure and we don't have water leaks, etc. And I did have a question earlier, direct, which was about does it have to be logged? Again, there's no requirement to log it, but from a broker point of view, I would just say, please do, because that just builds up the proof and audit trail that you've been taking every precaution possible to secure the premises, and you've got a log saying it was okay on this date, visited, etc. So it just helps you to put the evidence together if you do have to claim. So insurers can't sort of push back on any of the terms, which they're not doing. That, you know, the faith insurers, so they're there to help at the moment as much as possible, which is why they've relaxed the unoccupancy terms at the moment.
Great. Yeah, it is always good to ensure you've got a backup for sure. So the next question says, is Legionella an issue? I've seen advice to run taps for 5 minutes once a week in closed buildings. Does this help? Is it necessary for cold water? Doesn't Legionella need warmth?
Yes, it does tend to need warmth, but where does the cold water come from? At the moment, I would imagine that there's a water tank somewhere in the roof or in the loft, and in the current weather conditions, that will allow a bit of warmth, and it could spread Legionella within the water system. Actually, running the taps for 10-15 minutes is probably a good process if the premises has been left over a long period of time.
Great. The next question says, if the church is hiring a building, who is responsible for ensuring safe distancing measures are in place?
We've covered that one, Lauren.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
So I have one that says, do you have any guidance for churches that hire buildings for their Sunday services? What should we be expecting from the venue providers before we are happy to resume meeting there?
Again, for you running your own kind of events in the building, it's a similar answer to before, that you've got to make sure that the safe distancing measures, etc., are in place. But you definitely need to be speaking to the landlord, whoever's responsible for that building, to understand what they have done to make it a safe environment. There's a duty on them before they let anybody back in their buildings to make sure it's a safe place to go to. In the current climate, which again is all down to the government guidance, as well as you having the responsibility once you are in there as the hirer. So it's a bit of a joint responsibility, to be fair. So we need to be talking to landlords in circumstances where you are hiring buildings to understand what they've done.
Great. Okay. I'm having quite a few people ask about the slides, and will they receive them? Yes, after this call, the recording and the slides will be posted on the Stewardship website. We will be providing a link at the end of the call, and we can also email that out to anyone that is interested. So moving on to the next question. Would you advise prohibiting use of hand dryers in loos because of possible distribution of spores, especially once more people are going back into church?
Yeah, there is no specific guidelines that I've seen from Health and Safety or indeed the government websites. But I think this is an application of common sense, really. You know, the hand dryers will dispel, and I think the recommendation would be to use paper towels if at all possible.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So the next question says, once services of some sort resume, should we advise people to wear face masks? Do food bank questions, once services of some sort resume, should we advise people to wear face masks?
I think, again, we are relying on the government advice for that one. There's been nothing specific so far that I'm aware of. Obviously, they're talking about potentially having to wear PPE on public transport, etc., which I think if I was doing it, then I definitely would. But I think if you carried out your cleaning regime, then it's really a matter for yourselves, unless the government guidance changes that. Unless you've got any more thoughts, James?
Well, no, there is a lack of government advice on this point, but from a personal perspective, I think given the current circumstances, I would wear a mask, and if people do have those, then fine. But I don't think we can be prescriptive given the current government guidelines, or lack of.
Sure. Perfect, thank you. So there is one church that has been using a food bank once a week or hosting one. Are there any specific considerations that they need to make at this time?
No, I don't think there is. We have a number of food bank risks that we insure, and I think, provided that they follow the government guidelines, then there shouldn't be any issues.
Perfect, great. Just to add on that face mask question, we've got Kevin Russell, who's one of our experts here at Stewardship. He has just given us some advice here as well, saying that face coverings would be preferred rather than face masks as recommended, where social distancing is difficult as per the government guidance, so that face masks can be reserved for frontline workers. So I just thought that might be a nice little thing to add as well, to encourage face coverings rather than face masks. So I have someone asking, do we need to do temperature tests?
Temperature of what? Can that be? Not sure what that is related.
I'm assuming it's in reference to the temperature of the building, but if whoever asked that question, if you could use the chat function to maybe give us a little bit more detail, that would be very helpful. We will move on to the next question and then we'll come back to that one. So I understand the virus cannot live outside the body for more than a few hours, but maybe a few days if in perfect conditions. Therefore, is it sensible to clean after an event if the building isn't going to open again for several days? Might that just add to the risk for the cleaner?
Yes, I think it's absolutely, we ought to continue to apply those processes whereby after use we clean all surfaces, door handles, door knobs, and other surfaces which may have, where others may have been in contact with. So yeah, I think it's a reasonable precaution, really.
Wonderful, great, thank you. So I'm just going through, so we do have a lot of questions that I'm trying to get to, so just give me a second. So someone says, we have a loss of rental income from our church hall and also a loss of offerings due to the pandemic. This affects our ability to pay our mortgage. Can we get some help from the government for the shortfall? Chris Perkins, did you want to answer that one?
Hi there. In terms of help from government, you can refer to our webpage, which gives some support on what you can apply to for the government in that instance. That there isn't a great deal of support for loss of earnings, unfortunately, from the government for churches and charities. So.
Okay, great.
If I could just add a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Go for it, Barry.
A lot of customers look to their insurers for potential loss of income at this time, and it depends obviously on the insurer that you're with. They've all got different levels of cover. If I can speak for Ansvar, because you're here, James, there is a specific exclusion for this particular notifiable disease. So there's no cover there, which is the same with most faith insurers. There's one faith insurer that we do deal with that has a little bit more open wording, but the onus of proof is all about getting confirmation that your loss of income is as a direct result of the outbreak, and the cover is really designed to be an outbreak at the premises as opposed to just the pandemic as we've seen it nationwide. So there are going to be cases where people can potentially make insurance claims, but the onus of proof relating to that will be maybe difficult to find. But obviously, we will help our clients wherever we can to formulate those claims and make it success going forward. But it's a big debate in the country at the moment, because you can imagine there's lots of commercial businesses that have had to close, suffering a huge loss of income because they're commercial, as opposed to church and charity that probably rely on donations, etc. And hopefully your congregants are still helping you out and making those contributions. But from the commercial aspect of what we do, of potential cafes, nurseries, that kind of activity, you need to refer to your own insurer / broker to see if there's any cover there available under the insurance policy.
Perfect, great. That's really helpful. Thank you, Barry.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, of course.
The insurance companies have got a bad press of late, and that's probably due to the misunderstanding of what insurance covers are and what we actually offer. In this particular situation, I don't think it was ever the insurer's intention to cover pandemic risks, and for the vast majority of policies, as Barry's already said, that it isn't covered. But if we were to consider pandemic risks and the covers which would protect churches, charities, etc., we would need to complete a full assessment of the risk, and premiums would be calculated accordingly based on that risk. In real terms, the cost of cover would be extremely expensive, and as a result, I don't think anybody would be able to afford the type of covers that is expected generally by the market going forward. That being said, I think it's my view that once this is all over, I think the government insurers probably need to get together and provide an affordable solution, and that may be much the same as what was done with the flood risks and the introduction of flood re. And this is a government-sponsored initiative which all insurers were levied to support the catastrophic risk. And maybe once the dust does settle, maybe that is a possible solution going forward.
Great, perfect, thank you. The next question says, would there be expectation if track and trace is in place that only those who are using the app to join meetings?
I suppose if I answer that one, that's, I mean, I don't know how soon we're likely to get this track and trace. It seems to have been on the cards for quite a while. And looking at the news this morning, the people who are being employed to look into all of that kind of thing are struggling to get the right help and guidance. So we might be a way off. But again, unless there's a government instruction to do so, it's going to be up to you guys as part of your risk assessment, whether you take that kind of precaution and introduce that for people coming to the building.
Great, thank you. The next question says, we hire out a room attached to our church. Do you have any advice about what changes we should make to our hire agreement once we're allowed to hire out the room again?
James, have you got thoughts on that one?
Sorry, I didn't catch that one. Could you repeat it? Sorry.
Yes, of course. We hire out a room attached to our church. Do you have any advice about what changes we should make to our hire agreement once we're allowed to hire out the room again?
Well, no, I think the insurances which are in place will probably still stand the test of time in respect of what is required. We will not be able to provide pandemic cover going forward. So in that respect, I think it's the usual PL covers that you would want.
Great, perfect, thank you. The next one says, how are employee liabilities affected by staff working and running services much more from home?
If I can pick that up, obviously the employer's liability under faith and charity wording applies to volunteers as well as any paid staff. Hopefully the majority of people who can do are working from home, and in those circumstances an employer still remains responsible for the health and safety of their employees. So they need to have the risk assessments in place to make sure that they can work safely at home, that they've got the right equipment, etc., and not exposing their staff / volunteers to risk. So the same onus is on an employer, whether they're working at home remotely or in their office environment, wherever they may be on a normal basis.
Perfect, great. And the next question says, during period of lockdown that church premises is not in use, can churches get a refund or compensation for the lockdown period?
Do you want me to pick that one up?
Yeah,
go
fine.
for it.
It is very difficult, and it is a challenge for us as insurers to look at the risks and what risks are currently being sort of utilised, and whether or not a refund should be made. Generally speaking, given that the premises are closed and considered to be unoccupied, the risk itself has in fact increased. So whereas there may be some savings in some of the PL covers, insofar as the property risk is concerned, there is an increased level of exposure there, which there is a balancing act to be done. But there are scenarios whereby I think you can consider refunds, and the FCA have been quite vocal on this insofar as what we could do insofar as considering reductions in covers, and this can be considered given the right circumstances. And a good example would be a fundraising event cover. The event is cancelled and the liability covers are no longer required, so a refund can be considered. However, if the cancellation cover is still effective, and some of this exposure has already been used, and as a consequence, we will probably look to provide return premiums on a pro rata basis. In addition to that, I think insurance companies have been asked to consider payment holidays, and Ansvar, particularly, we've given an extra sort of 1 month insurance, which allows the customers to arrange the insurance. So there is a 1 month's grace. But insofar as payment holidays are concerned, this is a difficult one, and it's one which I think the industry itself will struggle with, because the wordings given by the FCA suggest that insurers have to be satisfied that's in the best interest of customers. Merely granting a payment holiday is not a solution, because what would happen, any payment holiday would only defer inevitable payment, which could be 4 months premiums in one go. So it's a difficult one. We are struggling with it. We're looking to be sympathetic as much as we can, but for our own book of business, we offer package policies, which is combined both property and liability covers. So in that respect, it's difficult to separate premiums and come to an agreed figure.
If I can just add a little bit on that as well, I would urge everybody that's got property, as in contents and all risks, if you've got all risks cover, which effectively is extending cover for property away from the premises. Clearly, if you're in lockdown and that equipment is in the building permanently, you could look to save premium by removing the all risks and just dropping it down to general contents cover, because insurers obviously charge a larger premium for all risks. So if they're not leaving the premises, you haven't got that risk exposure. So insurers would look to do a refund on that basis. So speak to your broker, speak to your insurer, see if any savings could be made by adjusting covers in some way. Faith insurers and charity insurers do things in different way. A lot of it is property driven for the premium, so buildings, contents and all risks, and the package that James refers to there means that you get a lot of other covers built in as standard, which don't necessarily reflect in the premium. It's built up by the combination of the property side. But it's always worth talking to your broker or insurer, just to discuss if you can make any kind of savings, if you need to obviously watch the purse strings.
Great, really good advice, thank you. The next question says, while negligence has to be proven, could we be prosecuted for lack of due diligence if someone believes we have not been diligent enough over infection precautions?
Well, prosecution is as a result of a criminal act, so I'm not sure that would be the route that it would go down. I think this is similar to a question that we fielded earlier on that James did about an insurance claim on the grounds of negligence be brought against the church or charity if they got infected at the premises, and it is all about the negligence. They would have to prove that you have been negligent to start with by whatever measure that is. And they would also have to prove that they picked up the disease at your premises and it was your fault. The reality is you might get a claim and the insurers will deal with it. Chance of success is very remote, I would suggest.
Yeah. This is a good one. It says, is it necessary to advise our insurer that the premises are closed?
Part of the normal unoccupancy wording in all policies is that yes, you should advise insurers, but I mentioned a few minutes ago about the relaxation of these kind of conditions, that insurers don't necessarily expect you to then tell them, because we all understand churches have been told to close and majority of charities have had to anyway, so it's commonly known that the buildings are closed at the moment. Again, as the broker, I would always advise that you tell your broker and insurer of your current position, just so that they are fully aware whether you're occupied or not, whether you are unoccupied, whether you can manage to do your weekly checks, what else you've done in terms of risk management to protect the premises. If you can keep them fully informed, then that's the best position to be in.
Great, perfect, thank you. Have there been any suggestions of potential dates for churches to be open for services?
I suppose I can only relay what I've heard on the news, and they are talking potentially early July. But of course, they came out very quickly, didn't they, a week or so ago about schools reopening on the 1st of June. But then that's going to be down to local authorities to authorise that. And obviously there's some pushback about the timescales, etc. So I think 4th of July is what they're looking at the earliest. And I believe that there is a task force in place at the moment that's reviewing that. So further guidance to follow, I suggest.
Great, perfect. We're having a lot of questions about the use of, once we are open, how to dry our hands. I don't know if this is relevant because we've had more than one. Earlier you were talking about the use of hand dryers and really using common sense. Someone is asking, would you then prohibit the use of hand towels as well?
Prohibit the use of hand towels?
Yes, so I mean the question simply just says, would you prohibit the use of hand towels?
No, on the contrary, I think hand towels are probably preferable because they're disposable and they go straight in the bin.
Yeah, so they're referring probably to a normal cotton type towel that might be hanging up in the toilets for everybody to share. Clearly,
probably.
That would be one that you should remove straight away, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Supply a stock of paper towels and a bin to put them in afterwards. Obviously, what you have to consider is then how you dispose them and do that in a safe way. So if paper towels definitely are the way to go forward, and just be careful on the disposal thereof.
Great, perfect. The next one says, I assume we need to check the hiring organisation's risk assessment, who is hiring our building on distancing, use of equipment, etc. Either that or we need to attend every hire meeting. What do you think?
We've had similar before, haven't we, question-wise, where obviously you as the building owner have a responsibility to make sure it's a safe environment for hirers to come and attend. But they also have that responsibility that whilst they are the hirer and are carrying out activities with visitors maybe to your premises, they also have to make sure that they're working in a safe environment as well. So I think similar to the landlord situation that I mentioned earlier, there's a bit of a joint responsibility. I don't think you need to change the contract wording in any way, but it's down to common sense. Once you let people back in the building, make sure that you're operating it safely and make sure that you understand that they are also doing things in a safe manner. And risk assessments are really the first place to go to start that, because that process of risk assessing is identifying the risk, then managing it and minimizing it. That's what risk assessment is basically all about. So identify, manage and minimize.
Great, perfect. So the next question, I think, Chris Perkins, you might be able to answer this one. It says, are mortgage rates coming down in line with the Bank of England base rates?
Yeah, it depends on your lender really, and depends on their policy. Some will automatically come down with the product with the Bank of England base rate, because the rate is automatically linked to the Bank of England base rate. So do check with your facility to see where you're at. I can give an example of ours. We are ours is a stewardship variable rate, so it's assessed by our trustees, and it's brought up and down according to their decision, and so it's not Bank of England base rate later.
Great. Barry, did you have anything to add to that?
I don't think so. It's not my speciality, so
Perfect.
Chris.
Just checking. So I've got someone asking, should we be now putting in hand sanitizer, 2-meter floor markers, posters, etc., in place in our buildings, ready for when we reoccupy?
I think all reasonable precautions are welcome. So it is a common sense approach. Whether or not you need to actually put some markings as far as 2 meters are concerned, I think that would be difficult if you're looking at a church. The church would be covered with various different lines and the like. I think it is a common sense approach. Certainly with sanitizers, I'd have those at every entrance going in to the premises, and even using an indoor and an outdoor. So you've got that control over people coming into the church.
Great. So we've got a time for just a few more questions. The next one that I have says, how can church employers manage the health and safety risks of employees working from home? For example, an unsafe domestic appliance in an employee's home.
Not sure you can be responsible for someone's domestic appliances. The environment in which they are working, be it a desk or whatever, it is about a risk assessment, and the employee working at home should complete their own risk assessments that you provide. So they're confirming that they've got the right chair to sit on with, the right height screen, etc. Those kind of things, you've got to basically get that information signed off by the employee. In times where we're not in lockdown, what an employer would be expected to do is to carry out that risk assessment and potentially visit the employee at home just to see the circumstances and sign off to say, yes, you're working in a safe environment. Clearly that's not possible at the moment. So a risk assessment for the employee stroke volunteer to complete, that you can then have on record that they're saying these are the conditions that I'm working in. It's never going to be perfect because obviously it's outside of your control to a certain extent, but if they've signed off a declaration to say these are the circumstances I'm working in, I don't think you can do a great deal more. And again, you have that responsibility of their safety and well-being, but if they suffer some kind of injury whilst working at home, they would still need to prove that you are negligent for allowing them to pick up that injury. So that's why that risk assessment is important. If they've done that declaration and said it's a safe environment, if something goes wrong there, you've got that little bit of protection.
Great, perfect. So this one's a good one. It says, during this period, we are carrying out repairs and renewals to the property. This is using our own volunteers and external contractors. Is there any additional risk assessment required? We are trying to ensure the necessary social distancing.
James, have you got any guidance on that? I know you've got a bit on your website.
No, I think the contractors have a duty to their own employers. And the policyholder or the church will have responsibility to the volunteers. And again, it's just reaffirming it's applying the government rules insofar as the distancing is concerned. That will be very difficult, I'm sure, but provided that that guidance has been shared with the employee stroke volunteer, then really it's down to the individual.
Again, if I can just add a little bit
Yeah,
on
of
this,
course.
potentially contractors or cleaners coming in, again, they're accessing your building. So the responsibility of making a safe environment is on you, as obviously well as the contractor doing their work. But I would suggest that if you've got contractors and cleaners coming in, you have some kind of rota in place, so they're maybe not there at the same time, having a written record of who's been in and when, and ensure that obviously the hand sanitizer and hand facilities are easily available near every entrance if possible. So it's that duty of care, again, carrying out the risk assessment and trying to make it as safe as possible. Insurers often carry out surveys of premises, which you probably all know, and ask for certain risk improvements, etc. At the moment, most insurers have a relaxed attitude, a little bit more about the like the unoccupancy, that they don't expect you to be carrying out the maintenance, particularly in the same way that potentially you did before. But again, talk to the insurers, make sure they're aware that if you have a risk improvement that needs to be completed by the end of May, for example, and you can't get it done, just speak to the broker, insurer, keep them updated with your current position. And then when hopefully lockdown starts to get released, again, subject to being safe, pick up that workload then after that.
Great, perfect. So this one says, we're currently recording content for Sunday mornings to broadcast on Sunday mornings. This is being done in staff's individual homes. If safety measures are in place, could we look at doing it in the church building to record the preacher and also maybe a smaller worship band, including the safe distance measures?
I think quite a few churches are doing that at the moment, aren't they? That they are streaming services from the church. But again, from a risk assessment point of view, I'm sorry I keep using that expression, but it's crucial in the insurance and risk management world. You keep the number of people to a minimum. Make sure that either you've got a member of your direct family who's doing the filming or streaming, or have a fixed camera on a stand, and just keep it down to a minimum. But doing that from the church premises as opposed to your home, it's all about, is it safe to do so? But I think there's quite a few churches who are still managing to do that.
Brilliant, great. So we've got time for one more question. It says, when churches can meet, when they can meet again, what may be the guidelines for serving communion?
I mean, there's been no guidance yet. I suspect that the places of worship task force will come up with that kind of guidance in due course. I've seen the footage, as I'm sure you have, of opening churches in Italy and how there's been confusion there on that kind of thing. It's the common sense approach, really, of the lack of contact as much as possible, and the distancing should still be observed for quite a time to come. But hopefully the task force, once they issue guidance on reopening, will include that as part of the guidance that we get in due course.
Great. I know I said the last one, but I feel like this one could be a quick one and helpful to a lot of people. Do you have an online example of home working risk assessment?
Kingdom Bank have one, because obviously we've created our own at the moment, but I'm not sure if something like that is available on health and safety. James, do you know that?
Yeah, there's workstation assessment forms and templates on the health and safety website. But again, I think we've probably got a template which can be used.
Brilliant. We will ensure to include that all with the resources that we will group together after the end of this call. Now, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions today. If we weren't able to get to your question, I do apologise. But if something maybe does pop into your mind later as well, please do send that into Barry at Kingdom Bank. So his email address is in blue on the slides now. And also, if you would like to give us any feedback on today's call or are interested in any further webinars that we are running as part of our COVID series, please do contact myself, Lauren, at events@stewardship.org.uk. That being said, for future webinars, for all of you that are attending this one, we do have another webinar happening in partnership with our friends at Kingdom Bank in 2 weeks' time. So it'll be on Thursday, the 4th of June at 1 p.m. And the topic is next steps for mortgage management. So if you are interested in signing up for that, please do sign up for our events and training mailing list. We will be sending out invites shortly. But again, if you do have any issues with that, you can contact myself at Stewardship. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on, I know that a few churches at the moment have been struggling a little bit with the traditional income streams of giving. So we just wanted to highlight our give.net platform that we do have available. So for those of you who have been experiencing maybe a lack of resource for online giving, we have a great resource available that not only can provide regular giving from your donors, but also just one-off payments. So if you are interested in that, then contact our giving services team at giving@stewardship.org.uk. As I said, that is all that we have time for today, but I would really love to close by handing over to Chris Sheldon, the CEO of Kingdom Bank, to pray for us to end.
Hello, thanks for being with us today. Shall we pray together? Father God, we want to give you thanks for your love and care for us as individuals and for us as organisations that serve you. We want to give you thanks for the beauty of the world that we live in, that you have created, and we remember that this is your world. And we want to thank you for calling us as leaders and servants of your ministry. And following today's meeting, we want to pray that you would enable us all in our work, guide us in our decisions, and inspire us in our service. And Father God, I pray now your blessing on all of us who've been part of this afternoon's meeting, and pray that you would help us in our work as we serve you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that prayer, Chris. And lastly, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to all of our lovely panelists who have taken part in today's webinar. And also, we just hope that you enjoyed the topics that were discussed, and we hope to see you in the next one. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.